What's up, my Canadian cousins? How are you guys today? So, as you can see from the thumbnail, I'm going to be addressing for the second time the whole issue with our felon-in-chief about to take office on January 20th. You know, this is something that really very much upsets me, and I can't sit here and go about my business, as I said in the prior video related to this, dealing with a channel that is all about my relationship with the country of Canada and learning more about it, and the relationship, me being representative of an American. And it just feels wrong in some sense that Canada has to worry about its relationship with the United States because of the election of this unpredictable buffoon who, I'm not going to repeat everything I said in the last video about how I feel about Donald Trump, but who is threatening you with damage to your economy unprovoked. Of course, there's a byproduct of that in Canada right now with some of the political upheaval. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that the political upheaval in Canada with yesterday's announcement by Justin Trudeau of his resignation is solely or even mostly related to Donald Trump, but it is tangentially related, at least the timing of his resignation. What that actually means for Canada in going forward after January 20th in its negotiation of whatever may come out of what Trump is threatening to do and why he's threatening to do it. And so, you know, I don't want to make this channel about this. It is not a political channel. I don't want it to be a political channel, but it just feels wrong, as I've said in the past, for me to just sit here and pretending like this isn't happening, because it is happening, and it really pains me. One of the reasons why I also feel like I have to address it is that this keeps creeping into the comments on my completely unrelated videos. And so some of you certainly want to talk about it or want to be heard on this issue. And that's understandable. And because this issue keeps creeping into the comments, that's another reason I felt I had to address it again. Before I go into it, I want to note that I won't be repeating most of what I already said in the prior video. I'm going to drop a link in the description to that video. And at the end of this, it'll appear up on the screen, I think, over here, and you can just click on it if you want to watch it if you haven't seen it already. Except that I will say this, because if you haven't seen that video and you're not going to watch it, you need to know where I'm coming from, and I think you probably already do based on how I open this, but I will let you know that I absolutely despise Donald Trump. And don't get me wrong, I don't despise conservatives. That isn't what I'm talking about, and I'll address that a little bit more lately. I'm absolutely dismayed to see such hostility exhibited towards our neighbor and closest family member in the family of nations. We are an incredibly divided country. Notwithstanding that Donald Trump won the Electoral College in a landslide, which he did, he only won the vote by about 1%. We are an incredibly divided country. He won a little over 77 million votes. Kamala Harris won just under 75 million votes. That's really how close it is, and that's how divided we are. You have to understand that when you look at the United States acting on policies that a particular president or a particular Congress implements, it doesn't reflect the will of all of us. And I hope you understand that, because there are so many of us who absolutely love Canada and want it to continue to exist as a shining example of what a modern Western democracy can be, as a sovereign nation separate and apart from the United States, as it should be. The other thing that I'd like you to know, just because I think it's fair so you understand where my natural biases come from, is that I am a Democrat who happens to believe in a strong, solid democracy. I respect our alliances. I respect our international treaties. I believe in being a good international citizen. I believe that the United States should exercise its leadership responsibly, believe in social justice, etc., etc., etc. And those are probably a lot of common beliefs that people on both sides of the political spectrum have. We don't always agree on how, to achieve those goals and how to implement those beliefs. However, I'm a 53-year-old dude. I've been around a long time. And, I understand and have respect for the conservative viewpoint when it truly is conservative viewpoint within a democracy, that is truly democratic, small d, adheres to democratic norms, small d. And I'll just say that in my view, Donald Trump is not a true conservative, not at all. Now, as far as Trump using tariffs as a threat coercively, that was my initial impression. When he first did the tweet about imposing a tariff unless Canada takes action to secure its border with the United States, I actually wasn't sure whether he really believed there was a border problem to the north. And I think he does believe that there is. And I've actually watched since then some Canadian news programs that talked about the border issues that exist, and there are some. It certainly isn't the way to deal with it. They're nowhere near as serious or as problematic as on the southern border, but perhaps we could work, if we were two friendly, responsible governments could work together to solve the problem rather than one side bullying the other into coercive action, which is no way to deal with the situation, but there it is. So whether or not he believes that's true remains to be seen. Whether or not Canadian action on doing something on the border will satiate him remains to be seen. I also said in my prior video, and I believe that, part of it was coercive to get Canada to spend more money on its defense commitments to hit the 2% GDP, and otherwise. And obviously we do face threats from the likes of Russia and China and the Arctic. It's serious. But again, if there is some light between us on the issue of defense spending, there's a way to deal with it diplomatically, respectfully, by working together. This is not it. But then as time has gone on over the last few weeks, I start to question whether he seriously wants to tariff Canada. I didn't really think he did. I thought he was going to use it coercively to get concessions on other issues. The more I look at it, the more he keeps talking about the United States subsidizing Canada and how that's not fair. Of course, that's bullshit. We don't subsidize Canada at all. What he's talking about is the trade deficit between us, and there exists a trade deficit based on a mutually beneficial trade agreement wherein we get, needed material and resources such as oil and lumber from Canada. And it works. It works for us. Why is there a trade deficit? Gee, I don't know. Could it be because the United States has 340 million people creating demand as opposed to 40 million people creating demand? So the demand for United States goods and services can't be as high in Canada, where you only have 40 million people, whereas ours obviously is going to be higher. So, it's just absolutely absurd for him to be calling this a subsidy. I don't think he really believes it is. I just don't know. I should stop saying that because I can't get into that man's brain. Who the hell knows what he actually believes or doesn't believe? But he says it, and he says it to get his people on board, to get public support and his supporters to get behind the notion that Canada is taking advantage of the United States, and he's a transactional guy, and he's going to put America first, and so that when and if he imposes a tariff, he's going to act like it is a response to some kind of being, as an aggrieved party for some kind of grievance, which is bullshit. Again, it's just not true, and it's not real. And anyone who believes that it is not doing their homework or is just incapable of critical thinking. So, this is purely a one-sided aggression, our aggression towards you. And I shouldn't even say our, because it's not me. It's not the 75 million of us who didn't vote for him. But it's a one-sided aggression. The reason why I'm starting to question whether or not he actually wants to impose this tariff is because what's gone on in domestic politics. The Republicans tried to get the debt ceiling raised. Mike Johnson tried to get the debt ceiling raised in Congress, and some Republicans didn't go along with it, and it's not happening. So what that means is he wanted to increase the debt ceiling so that he could give his planned tax cuts to the rich and corporations so that he could pay for it, because he increased the budget deficit immensely when he was president, which is not a conservative value if you're going to cut taxes, which is a conservative value if you can. You also cut spending. And he didn't do that. And, his tax cut has no way of being paid for. And from what I'm hearing from some news sources, and I don't know whether this is true or not or how they know this, but he views these tariffs, against Canada and other countries as being a way to, in the short term, fill the U.S. coffers in order to close the budget deficit, which will be exacerbated by doing this tax cut, so that he can do it. And he can say he delivered on that promise, regardless of the damage it does in the long term, the damage it does to our relationship with our friendly neighbors, trading partners, and allies, regardless of the economic damage it will do to the Americans who are going to be footing the bill for these tariffs. Talking point from his side is sort of that, well, that'll bring all these jobs back to the United States. We'll drill more oil. We'll produce, more of the material we're getting from Canada domestically, and we'll all be better. We just don't have the infrastructure to do that and to do it right away. The oil issue is complex because a lot of that oil comes from Canada, is refined here, and then it's sold out to other countries because we have the oil refining capability and you have the oil production capability. So, all these issues are so complicated, but at the end of the day, there is no question that the American consumer and that the Canadian consumer are both going to be hurt by a trade war, and Canada can and should retaliate if he does this, and that is what's going to happen. Be bad for all of us. He doesn't care because he wants to claim the short-term victory of a tax cut, and so that's why I fear the 25% tariff, whether it ends up being 25% or not, is real. When he put tariffs on, say, to a limited extent on China and China's soybeans and such, the American farmers were hurt by it, and the government had to help them by subsidizing them. We can't do that across all industries. We trade with Canada, and it's impossible. So, this whole thing I just see an absolute dumpster fire train wreck in the future for both of us by this policy. I still hold out some hope that a deal can be had where this doesn't happen, where Canada gives some concessions on whatever, and I don't even want that. I promise I don't want that. I hate that this is being used coercively, but I can't deny the reality that this man will be president and that he will try something, and so I just have to hope for the best case scenario and the best deal that can happen that will hurt Canadians and Americans the least. And I truly want that for all of us. Now, if anyone asks to themselves, why would Trump do this to us? Doesn't he understand the relationship we have? Doesn't he care? Those are rhetorical questions. I think the answers to both of those questions are no. But just let me say this. You all probably know by now that Trump is purely a transactional guy without any understanding or care about relationships, geopolitics, history, or economics. Honestly, he doesn't. He acts as though everything is an underhanded New York City real estate transaction, and that isn't what being a world leader is about. And to the extent that he should give some consideration to our relationship, he's not capable of it. So, famously, John F. Kennedy visiting and I think addressing Parliament in Canada and in his term in the early 60s said, quote, "Geography has made us neighbors, history has made us friends, economics has made us partners, and necessity has made us allies." Do you think for a minute Trump knows about that speech or ascribes to the sentiment of that speech? He doesn't. He has no clue. And even if someone were to tell him that and try to explain why John F. Kennedy said it and how sincere Kennedy was when he said it and the understanding that he had of where we were as two neighbor nations vis-a-vis each other at the time, he would brush it off. All he didn't know is, why are we talking about John F. Kennedy? He was a Democrat. He was a loony liberal. He's fake news. He was terrible for this country. He's a loser. He got assassinated. What kind of president gets assassinated? He's a loser for getting assassinated. That's what he would say. That's what he would say. If we were to say to him, but Mr. Trump, Mr. President, don't you care that during the Iran hostage crisis, Ambassador Ken Taylor and his staff put their lives at risk to save American citizens and ended up having to close down their embassy in Iran entirely, close down the mission altogether, and sacrifice that at least ability to have diplomatic communications with this nation? He wouldn't care. He would say, well, that was all the Democrats' fault that even happened. That was Carter's fault, and Carter's a loser. Carter was a terrible president, and he got his ass handed to him by Ronald Reagan, and what a loser he is. And, what was in it for the Canadians anyway? Why would they do that? They're losers and suckers for putting themselves in that position. Just as he said about our troops that fought and died in World War I who are buried in sacred ground in France. I don't get it. What was in it for them? They're losers and suckers. That's how he sees it. And if that's how he sees American military deaths, he's not going to care less about what Canada did for the United States. Not going to care less. Not going to care less that you harbored our citizens during 9/11. Not going to care less that the only time Article 5 of NATO was ever invoked was in the aftermath of 9/11, and that all of our allied nations were treaty bound and gladly came to our defense. Wasn't necessary, but there were. I live on the East Coast. I was in New York when that happened. It had an impact on me that will be with me for the rest of my life. There were NATO fighter jets patrolling the East Coast, not just American fighter jets, NATO fighter jets were patrolling our coast, and I'm sure Canada did as well. And I know what they did to harbor and care for and love our citizens who were on the ground in British Columbia and in Newfoundland. I know what they did. He doesn't know, and even if he did know, he wouldn't care. He would not care. Suckers and losers, anyone. Who asked them to do that anyway? That's what he would say. So this is the guy you're dealing with. I don't think he's even capable of understanding and absorbing history and what it means to relationships, right? He doesn't know or understand our own history. Famously, he was giving a speech. And he was I think he was president. He was talking about formation of the Continental Army in 1775 by the Continental Congress while we were in a crisis with Great Britain, and actually trying at that point to repair our relationship before we ended up declaring independence in July of 1776. So the Continental Army was basically militia that was command was taken over by George Washington, and he clearly had a canned speech that somebody wrote for him in a teleprompter. But as he is wont to do, he went off on a tangent and started talking about how the great formation of the Continental Army in 1775, that the army had nothing but victory at Fort McHenry in the rocket's red glare. Well, he's mixing up there the War of 1812 and the Revolutionary War because he lost his track on the teleprompter and didn't realize that he was talking about two wars. But in between those two things, talked about how the Continental Army took over the airports from the British. In 1775, took over the airports. This is the guy we're dealing with. He has no concept of history. When any of this happened, that there were, even the notion that there, because he was riffing at that point, that there were airports in 1775 that needed to be taken over. So I've given up a long time ago on hoping that somebody can appeal to him to say, look, we've got a long history with this nation, with our neighbor. We've accorded each other special status. We have interests that diverge from time to time, and it's not always smooth, our relationship. Of course not. No two neighbors living side by side are always going to agree. Every nation acts in its self-interest, but it's been unprecedented, the extent to which we have this massively long border. We share so much in common culturally. We celebrate our cultural differences. We can honestly look at each other and say, hey, well, we do some things better than you, you do some things better than us. I'm diverging from the point as I'm riffing now, but my larger point was just that there is an important relationship here that has not always been smooth, but when you look at the history of the world and how two nations can live side by side together so peacefully for so long, so cooperatively in trade and alliances and friendships and cross-border family ties, it's just really unprecedented. I think it is. I can't think of any two nations, and he's willing to just throw it away. It's disgusting to me. My mother-in-law for my birthday in November bought me this peace arch here. Has meaning to me. I think it has meaning to a lot of people. But what Trump is doing now is figuratively tearing this thing down and rendering it ridiculous and rendering it meaningless. And I want it to have meaning again. So I truly hope it will. I truly hope that this storm blows over, that there is a result that doesn't harm you or us too much. We weather the storm of this guy and we move back on to normal relations after he's gone. That's my hope. I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know what's going to happen. The only other thing I'll say is, no matter, and this, I'm going to segue now into shortly about Justin Trudeau's resignation, is that no matter what you think about Justin Trudeau, hate him, love him, I understand what his popularity and approval ratings are right now. He represents Canada, okay? And so to be calling him the, Governor Trudeau or Canada the 51st state is insulting beyond belief. There's a veiled threat there, and even if you think he's joking, and he probably is, because he chides everybody. He chides everybody who he sees as in an adversarial relationship with him, coming into negotiating a deal or whatever. The only ones he seems to not do that with is Donald. The only person he seems to not do that with is Vladimir Putin. But he does that with everybody, internally, externally, whether you're a Republican or you're a Democrat or you're the loony liberal media, fake news, whoever it is. He came to admire Kim Jong-un, of all people in the world, but beforehand he was calling him Little Rocket Man. So, he does this, but, you're not doing it to Kim Jong-un. To do it to our best friend, like I said, he doesn't understand the history. He doesn't understand, and most Americans don't, that in the Canadian psyche, there is this sense that the United States is big and strong and has tried to take us over in the past. Now, it's been a long time since that's been any kind of real threat, but you remember the War of 1812, you learn it in school. The Fenian, incursions into Canada, the fear after the Civil War of manifest destiny. Does manifest destiny mean all of North America, Canada too? The rush to connect British Columbia and to the east and get Confederation so that there would be a stronger united Canada against the United States. And none of it came to pass, and the United States wasn't serious after the War of 1812 about ever annexing Canada again until now. And I don't think we are, and actually most Americans wouldn't stand for it. I even think most people who voted for him wouldn't stand for it, because there's no way to do it democratically. But what he doesn't understand is that these veiled threats touch that nerve. Even if he did understand, as I said before, he wouldn't care. It's just completely reckless and irresponsible, but it is what it is, and he is who he is, and we know that, okay? What has that done? Has that hastened Justin Trudeau's departure? Or maybe. I think probably. And I think the reason being is Trudeau is a politician. All politicians strategize. I'm sorry, my throat. I'm under the weather, and I've been drinking this throat-soothing herbal tea, and it's been helping me get through this without coughing. What was I saying? Oh, that Justin Trudeau is a politician, and he strategizes. Now, when you look at the fact that the NDP looked like it was moving towards supporting a confidence vote, certainly the Conservatives want that. The polling suggests that if the election were to happen now instead of in October, the Conservatives would mop the floor with the Liberals, and Pierre Poilievre has been chomping at the bit for a snap election, a confidence vote in a snap election. You have all of that domestic politics going on in the face of this threat that could become real as of January 20th. Justin Trudeau is saying he's going to resign in March, but he announces it now. He's going to prorogue Parliament until then. Well, the Governor General, technically, right? There is an analogy here, or a comparison between Joe Biden finally acknowledging, too late, honestly, too late, but that he should step aside for Kamala Harris, and she didn't have much time. There needs time for them to choose a viable candidate who could potentially shift the polling somewhat. Is the polling reflective of the Liberal Party in general, or is it reflective of the dissatisfaction with Justin Trudeau specifically? I don't know. It seems to me that this is strategy in order for him to be able to have time for the Liberal Party to put a new leader in place and campaign. Because now, if the earliest a confidence vote could happen is the end of March, and then a snap election wouldn't happen until the spring, then it maybe gives a little time for the Liberal candidate to make the case that they should be the person to take over rather than Pierre Poilievre. But in the meantime, January 20th is going to happen. You're going to have no sitting parliament, and you're going to have what we would, in the U.S. and probably in Canada, I don't know if you use the same term, but you'd have a lame duck prime minister. So how is this person going to deal with and negotiate with Donald Trump? I think maybe one of Justin Trudeau's hopes is that he does a deal with Trump, so and that may help the Liberal Party weather the storm if the deal is good and he comes out of it, looking like he did a good job as against Trump. I don't know. I'm removed from Canadian domestic politics. I'm only looking from the outside looking in. But I wonder if, because Donald Trump is a relationship person, I should say, if he feels like your politics are in line with his, if he feels like you are an ally, if you kiss the ring, he doesn't like Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau can't do anything to repair that relationship. Not that it's his fault, but he's a liberal. I've even heard, and I don't know if this is true, that Donald Trump doesn't like Justin Trudeau because his daughter Ivanka said he was handsome, which is beyond bizarre and weird. He's whatever. He's weird when it comes to his daughter. I wonder if Pierre Poilievre, if the Conservatives win, if they were in office now, would he be treating Canada differently? Would he be approaching this situation differently? Given what I said earlier, the way he views tariffs as being a way to increase the U.S. Treasury's coffers in the short term, I'm not sure. Maybe Canada doesn't need to be the country that this happens with. I don't know, but I suspect that possibly just because he's a conservative, and just because he's been an outspoken critic of a liberal government, that Pierre Poilievre might be viewed differently by Donald Trump than Justin Trudeau. Is he looking at Canada and saying, Canada is Justin Trudeau? And will change his mind and say, oh, Canada is Pierre Poilievre? Of course, it's not either. It's no single individual. I don't know. But I do wonder. I really wonder. I'm just posing the question. I'm not saying that Pierre Poilievre should be the prime minister, or that Justin Trudeau should remain the prime minister, or that a different liberal should become the prime minister. I'm not saying any of that. That's up to you. I'm posing the question because I really wonder. I'm no political science expert, but I do question the wisdom of proroguing Parliament during this very, very crucial time. It's really kind of a lose-lose situation in any event. I just wish all politicians in general, on both sides of our borders and throughout the world, would put country before person, and they just don't. Some maybe a little bit more than others. Some have better faith than others. 'Tis the reality of human nature, I suppose. The last thing I'll say about Justin Trudeau's resignation that I find interesting from a more global perspective. I am looking at the world and I'm seeing the French government collapse under a no confidence vote in the National Assembly. It remains unclear as to whether Macron will survive, but the office of president of France, they're sort of almost like a hybrid between our system and a true parliamentary system. So he's hanging on for now, but the prime minister is gone and the government had collapsed and had to be reformed. Olaf Scholz's government in Germany did not survive a confidence vote, which he had hoped. And you see a lot of populist right-wing parties gaining power and are influential in what's been happening in those places. You've seen some right-wing leaders take power in places like the Netherlands. And so you wonder if liberal governments and democracies around the world are failing, and if they are, why? And they need to take a real look in the mirror. And I was curious about this, and I start hearing and reading in news sources that, incumbent governments are going down all over the democratic world. Incumbent governments are going down. And even in governments in places that aren't so democratic anymore, like Hungary with Orban and his authoritarian regime, while he's not going down, his polling is incredibly bad right now. There were a number of articles out there that you could look at that talk about incumbent governments, whether they are conservative or liberal, are the ones who are all failing or having problems. I read an article by the Associated Press entitled "The Super Year of Elections Has Been Super Bad for Incumbents as Voters Punish Them in Droves." And that's really what I think, in part, is what's happening everywhere. Here, in Canada, in Germany, in France, in Britain, even Starmer. The reason he took over from long-standing conservative governments was dissatisfaction with the incumbency. And so you look at Britain and you say, well, at least a liberal government took over there. Yeah, but Starmer's approval ratings, they have tanked. So there's just such dissatisfaction and unhappiness among the electorates in democratic countries, and they're punishing the only ones they can right now, and those are incumbents. And why? We must ask ourselves, why is there such dissatisfaction and unhappiness and frustration? Well, this article posits, and it goes through a whole bunch of examples of what's going on all around the world. I gave you a few, but Japan and what's happened in New Zealand and in other places. It says this professor of political science at the University of Manchester in Britain says that it could be something directly to do with the long-term effects of the COVID pandemic, a big wave of ill health, disrupted education, disrupted workplace experiences, and so forth, making people less happy everywhere as they are taking it out on governments, a kind of electoral long COVID. And of course, a major part of that is the fact that there has been this global deterioration in people's standards of living as a result of housing crises, and housing costs all over the world are going up. And I know that's a huge problem in Canada as a result of inflation worldwide. And, governments are being blamed for it. People are pissed. People are pissed off, unhappy. It's showing. It's very interesting to me because if things don't improve under new governments that are taking hold now, and you might look to Britain as an example, the new governments are going to be unhappy, right? People were unhappy. People were very unhappy with Donald Trump after his first 4 years. He got his ass handed to him in that election, and he's back again because he was the only choice. So if the political pendulum keeps swinging back and forth between parties among ever increasingly divided electorate, we're never going to have progress. We're never going to have stability. We're in for a very rocky ride for the foreseeable future. I hope that's not the case. I really, truly do. I really, truly do. But hey, looking at this global phenomenon of incumbent governments having a real rough time right now and being punished does not mean, and I'm not suggesting that means that there aren't real legitimate reasons to be upset, specifically with the policies of incumbent governments. And I'm not telling any Canadian watching this how to feel about their incumbent government, about the opposition party, about the lesser parties like the NDP and the, even lesser Green Party. I don't know what impact they have on Canadian politics, and certainly the Bloc Québécois is its own unique party, I think, in world politics, in that it is a party that has a singular interest group in mind, being, in the province of Quebec, Quebec's interest in Canada. In any case, I'm sad for all of us, and I'm worried for all of us. But here's where my optimism comes to play. I know that there are a lot of very, very good, caring, loving, generous, charitable people in this world. I know there are a lot of horrible people too. But I think that we need to surround ourselves with the good people. Community, we need to not stop fighting for what we think is right at the ballot box. We need to refrain from just throwing up our hands and just saying, I give up, and letting it be the way it is and not moving forward to make all our lives better. But there are things we can do locally and amongst each other to just love and support each other, make our lives good, surround ourselves with good people. I'm going to bring this full circle. I feel awkward doing this channel now at this point in time. I do. But I'm going to continue doing it because I think now more than ever, it's important for me to maintain my connections to Canadians and Canadians' connections to an American person who may represent a larger portion of America that feels the way I do about you. Because that's all we can really do right now. So I'm going to continue to do it as long as you want me to, and as long as you continue to watch. And with that, my friends, I'm going to bid you a wonderful day. Peace and love from New York. Until next time, take care.